RunBuzz, episode 129. In this episode of the RunBuzz podcast, I speak with Duane Scotti of Spark Physical Therapy, and we discuss Iliotibial Band Syndrome, or ITBS, or sometimes commonly known as IT Band Syndrome. We talk about what it is, how do we know if we have it, what causes IT Band Syndrome, how to get rid of IT band pain, and how can we prevent IT Band Syndrome coming back in the future. All this and more coming up on today's episode. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the RunBuzz podcast. I am Steve Carmichael. I am your host, and thank you for joining me today. I have a great guest, and we're going to talk about IT band syndrome, and it's a very common overuse injury that impacts runners all the time. And in this episode, we're going to talk about what is IT band syndrome and how do I know if I have it, what causes IT band syndrome, how do we treat it, how do we prevent it, and lots and lots of tips of how to get rid of it. And I can't be more excited to have on Duane Scotti. He is a physical therapist and founder of Spark Physical Therapy. And so let's just jump into today's episode. Hi, Duane. Welcome to the RunBuzz podcast.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So before we get into the topic today, we're going to talk about IT band syndrome and a lot of tips that you're going to share with the audience about how to, what it is and how to prevent it and how to know you have it and what to do if you aren't able to resolve it quickly. Before we do that, why don't you take us back to when you first got... My pleasure. So before we get into the topic today, we're going to talk about IT band syndrome and a lot of tips that you're going to share with the audience about how to, what it is and how to prevent it and how to know you have it and what to do if you aren't able to resolve it quickly. Before we do that, why don't you take us back to when you first got interested in physical therapy, when you got interested in running, and just bring us up to speed, kind of who you are, how you got to where you are today, and what are you doing?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've been a physical therapist for 16 years, and I kind of got into physical therapy because I was always kind of fascinated by the human body and wanted to learn more about it, and started going down kind of health wellness route. I used to be a dancer myself and always enjoyed working out, so wanted to learn more about the human body. And I went to PT school, and I knew that was exactly what I wanted to do once I got into PT school. And I actually didn't start running. So I'm an adult onset runner. So I actually didn't start running till I was 32, after I actually had a hip surgery. So for a labral repair. And after that, my surgeon said, the treadmill is the worst thing I could do for my hip with the labral tear. So I said, well, what do I do? It's winter, it's in Connecticut. And he said, run outside. I'm like, really? And I started running outside and never looked back since. And I love every single day going out there on the road. And that's how I kind of started running. So I consider myself an adult onset runner and can relate to a lot of the patients that I do see, and I do help because I've been through some of the struggles that they have, especially after recovering from my surgery and having a bunch of muscle imbalances. And I started getting pains as I started ramping up my mileage and then kind of along my running journey myself.
Most of us are adult onset runners. Right? It's like, I don't know what it is about somewhere in that mid 30s for a lot of us, but like we feel like, I don't know if we just feel like we're losing our fitness at a certain point and we just naturally go to running is kind of that first thing, or accidentally. I always consider myself an accidental runner. Were you a runner before that surgery, or is it running as part of that was what got you into it?
I just did, honestly, running for quote unquote cardio. So I always worked out. I was always a gym kind of guy. And I would run on the treadmill to kind of get a little lean, right? And do some like intervals and sprints on the treadmill. But I never actually ran outside besides playing a sport, as a kid and growing up. And I never really thought to run for distances outside, and never knew how much joy it can bring, someone.
Now, how often are you racing or races, or are you just running for fitness, or how often are you out and about and doing it?
Yeah, so I like to run year round. So I run here in Connecticut, and it gets pretty cold in the winter. So I still go out there on a weekly basis. But I usually like to run 3 halves a year, and probably about 4 or 5 5Ks, maybe a 10K in there. So kind of like to push the limits a little bit, challenge myself, depending upon what my goals are for that year. But yeah, now it's really fun, especially knowing a lot more runners in my community, to get together. It's more, some social events too, to see a lot of the local runners and a lot of the runners that I help. So now they're more fun as opposed to just going to the races for the self. It's more of a social event now too, as well.
My running's been the same way. When I first started running, I didn't know anybody, and I went out to run races just for my own self competitiveness, I guess. And it's interesting. It's like as you meet more and more people, it becomes kind of that thing you do, weekends.
Yep,
And
yep.
I don't race nearly as much as I used to, but it's definitely into the running for the social aspect. All right, so I want to move into today's topic. So you've agreed to come on, and we're going to talk about IT band syndrome, or uh, how do you, I can't even say that word. Wait, hold on, let me try it. Iliotibial band syndrome.
There you go.
Yes. All
Nice.
right.
Very good.
I
Nailed it.
yes. That's one of those ones that's like say that really, really fast. People, it's an interesting term. So this thing comes up, constantly with runners, and it's I would say right behind maybe some of the knee issues. This is probably the second most or third most, maybe with Achilles and plantar fasciitis giving their run for the money as well as one
Hmm.
of the most common injuries among runners, and also can be one of the frustrating ones, at least with runners that I've coached, is like it hurts and it can stop you in your tracks. And sometimes it's hard to continue running through it. So, first of all, why don't you talk a little bit about what is IT band syndrome?
Yeah, no, so good thing. And actually, the iliotibial band, I actually wound up doing my PhD work, my dissertation on the iliotibial band, and actually looking at it for people with kneecap pain, so patellofemoral pain. But I spent a lot of time studying this iliotibial band, and we actually looked at kind of the muscle length test. So, studying this iliotibial band, and we actually looked at kind of the muscle length test. So it was funny that, or ironic, I guess, that we decided to go on this topic for tonight. But iliotibial band syndrome is really simply an irritation or an inflammation of that IT band as it rubs over the bone on the outside of your knee. So there's a little bone called the lateral femoral condyle on the outside of your knee, and it's really caused by repetitive bending and straightening of your knee, specifically around that 20 to 30 degree mark. So if you think about runners do that a lot, every single step we take, our knee is bending and straightening. So it really comes down to, usually, just like any overuse running related injury, is there's too much load to the tissue that causes this inflammation and irritation to occur as that kind of IT band slides over that bone.
So, would you say that the majority of IT pain comes over kind of to the kneecap and to the side, or is it common also to kind of go up the side of the leg, side of the thigh, up towards the hip?
Yeah, so the most common classic is actually very localized to the outside part of the knee. So that's very pinpoint specific, outside knee pain. It's never in the front of the knee, never on the inside of the knee. Those are your thinking. And a lot of times I'll see, runners who think maybe they have a meniscal tear, or maybe they're having patellar tendon pain. That patellar tendon pain's in the front. Meniscal pain, 9 times out of 10, is on the inside part of the knee, unless you have a lateral meniscus issue. But IT band is very localized, pinpoint specific. They're usually pointing to the outside part of their knee. You can, however, have irritation of the IT band higher up, so on the outside of the hip. That is more rare. And a lot of the runners who do have outside of the hip pain, it's actually usually more the gluteus medius tendon. So a gluteus medius tendinopathy, or sometimes people, like they used to call it trochanteric bursitis, where you have pain on the outside part of your hip. Now, a lot of the research kind of supports that it's more of a tendon issue versus the bursa itself. But you could have that irritation of the IT band higher up, but that's not the classic kind of or most common presentation.
Okay. Is it possible? So, is it possible to have IT band syndrome pain still onto the kind of the right side, but maybe below the kneecap or very close to the kneecap, but maybe to below it.
Yes, so that's where it attaches. So the IT band actually crosses the knee joint and attaches to your tibia bone, so your lower leg bone. So that will kind of, as it attaches down, you will feel that pain right kind of below that area.
Okay, I asked that for
Yes.
a very
Yeah.
selfish reason. So, because I had a strain a couple months back and it's got better for a while, but then it came back and it was a sudden onset strain. It came on
I,
very, very quick, which doesn't sound like, typically more of an IT band issue, but then it went away and I got running again, but then I got a pain almost in the exact area, but now it feels more in the kneecap. So it was, but it's kind of also to the side a little bit. And so what I'm wondering is if I have a secondary type of thing going on. Now it has gotten better because in the last couple of weeks,
mhm,
but it was just interesting because I also around the same time or just before my original injury started
mhm.
but it was just interesting because I also at around the same time or just before my original injury started doing very consistent with hit training, a lot of squats, lunges. Um, Also, there was treadmill running as part of it. It's part of a hit that does some 15 minutes cardio burst with
Yep.
with strength training. So a lot of things were changing at the same time. I had the initial strain. So I was just curious. Um, Obviously, that pain around the kneecap can be a lot of things, and my understanding is, and you just explained, the IT band syndromes around that kneecap, more towards the outside of the knee, or even slightly above the knee. How does it is when I've seen runners out with the running clubs and different things, a lot of people will be able to start and not feel any pain until they get maybe a half mile, a mile, or 2 miles into the run. Is that also a classic symptom, or can ITB band syndrome just be hurt when you're even not running?
Yeah, so it all depends upon the level of tissue irritability. So it means really how kind of flared up that is. So if you have someone who just did, a significant trail run that they weren't used to, and they did a lot of downhill and they weren't training toward that, then that IT band can become pretty inflamed. So it can be highly irritable. They're in an 8 or a 9 out of 10 pain. It hurts to walk around. They have pain almost even maybe at rest, as opposed to probably the more common scenario is as you described, that you're not feeling pain until you get to mile 3 or until you get to mile 6, or you have pain for the first mile. Sometimes I see this in the runners. I see you have pain in the first mile until it gets loose, and then it feels fine. Miles, and then when you get to the end of your run, then you start feeling that pain again. And honestly, that's pretty common in a lot of the running related injuries that we do see, Achilles problems, even plantar fasciitis sometimes. And that's usually where the tissue irritability is a little bit on the lower level side of things. And a lot of those conditions that you mentioned, actually, it really relates to blood flow as well, because all those areas, the Achilles tendon, the plantar fascia, and the IT band, they don't they're not very vascular, so they don't have a lot of blood supply and a lot of blood flow, and that's usually some of the issues that we see in terms of pain. And then it really kind of spills into a lot of the rehab concepts that we're going to get into. Is how do we get these things better? Um, a lot of the kind of shift in rehab, even since I started, treating as a clinician as opposed to kind of resting, cutting back, icing, and just, not doing much, trying to kind of quote unquote kind of baby it or rest it. Now we know that we actually need to load the tendon or the structure, the IT band, the connective tissue in order to kind of bring some blood flow and to stimulate some of that healing process to occur.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it takes forever to come back or for these injuries to heal. Some of them, especially plantar fasciitis and some of the tendon injuries, for that reason. And that was one of the first things I learned with my own injuries was you could take 2 months off and then the very next day you come back, it's like right there it is again, and it's so
Yep.
frustrating. And so one of the things I think that's interesting, and the reason why again I wanted you to talk specifically about this IT band syndrome is that one, I haven't talked about it before, so it's a new topic, but two is that it is common, and one of the common questions I get is, well, first is that it is common, and one of the common questions I get is, well, first of all, let's before we get in, how do we get better? We do know it's an overuse injury, um, but how do we? I guess the question I have is, it's so hard. Runners, we want to push ourselves, right? And we tend to push ourselves. What else causes it? I mean, we know it's a repetitive overuse injury, but oh man, how do we, how do you? Is it problematic in the same people? You tend to see it come in clusters. Do you see it with the same people? Like tend to get it more than others. You know how like once you get an injured,
Absolutely.
that injury can
Yeah.
reduce. Some people get it, and some people don't get it at all.
Right.
So
And
what causes these kind of these differentiating things between runners?
yeah, no, that's a great question that you ask, and it's a question in the sports science world we're trying to figure out as far as like what are the risk factors, right? That someone's going to get IT band syndrome. And really, when we look at a lot of these running related injuries, it really comes down to load and how much stress you're putting through your tissues. And the reason we get these issues is there's too much stress. So why is it that some runners who have the worst mechanics in the world and biomechanically don't look like they should be able to run, can run without pain, versus others get pain? And it really relates to kind of level of training, how much load you're applying to the tissues. That being said, there are certain characteristics or risk factors specifically for the IT band. Um, and that really relates to kind of what we call like intrinsic factors. So, like within your body, whether it is shorter IT bands. And so, let's just talk real briefly about anatomy here. The iliotibial band is that it's a band, it's a fibrous connective tissue on the outside part of your thigh. And it comes from the small muscle in the side of your hip, the side and the front part of your hip, your tensor fascia lata muscle. No, that's not a coffee. It's your TFL muscle, and that also connects to your glute, like your glute max. So those muscles kind of become this fibrous connective tissue that goes all the way down the outside of our leg and then connects to your lower leg bone. So as it crosses the knee. So that's one of the issues with this condition is it's more this like hard connective tissue. It's not really a muscle like when you get a hamstring strain. It's pretty much a big muscle belly or a quad strain. It's a big muscle. So that's one of the issues is it's a small muscle in the hip, then it's this connective tissue on the outside. And it doesn't really deal well with a lot of stretching because it's not really a muscle. It's like a hard connective tissue. And I think most of us feel that we really can't stretch this type of structure. So that's where soft tissue care and like foam rolling comes into play, and we can kind of get into some of that. But muscle length is one kind of cause or risk factor. But the biggest risk factor, honestly, and especially within the literature in the last decade, has shown weakness, specifically weakness of your side hip muscles. So your hip abductor muscles, your gluteus medius, as well as your hip rotators, your external rotators, so those deep hip muscles. And basically, with weakness of those muscles, it causes your running mechanics to be a little bit off, essentially. So if there's weakness in those muscles, your knee's going to dip. So your knee's going to dip in more. So it's going to roll in your tibia, your lower leg bone is going to roll in more as well. And that's actually what they've shown in a lot of runners who have this syndrome is they have this excessive, we call it like pelvic drop, as well as their knees dipping in. They're getting that dynamic valgus moment. So it's not just a function of running your knee straightens and bends, and that's what's causing the irritation, but it's really an issue, what we call like the frontal plane of movement, as well as the transverse, the rotation, that those that run and have excessive motion in both of those planes tend to get the irritation of the IT band. So if you can figure out what's causing the excessive motion in those planes, whether it's a weakness issue, or maybe the person has a leg length discrepancy, or maybe they're really running on country roads that have a really high camper in the road where the bank is really high and that the one leg is higher than the other, and that's creating this discrepancy and their pelvis is dropping more and they're running in one direction for 8, 10, 15, they're training for a full, over time, that's going to cause that irritation as they're ramping up their mileage if they're not allowing their body to adapt. So it's really a matter of getting down to what's causing the mechanics to be off with their running. And then, whether it's, changing the surfaces or if you are even running on a track, doing long runs on a track, which I don't know how anyone does that and keeps their sanity. But like even with like half training now, for me, my speed work is, 7 is like the longest I'll do on a track, and that's all the mental fortitude I have. But I know some people who've run like all their runs on the track. And if you're fortitude I have, but I know some people who've run like all their runs on the track. And if you're going in one direction on the track, then you're creating that moment of your pelvis to drop down on one side. So for those folks, it might be something as simple as half of the time you spend going one direction and the other half you should be going in the other direction. So kind of getting down to what's causing some of those mechanics to be off.
It's funny you mentioned the long distance on the track. I did that once when I was traveling. I was in another state and I didn't know where to run. And I ran in Phoenix, Arizona. I ran 18-mile long run on a track. The hardest part, I know that was crazy, but I only did it once in my life, so I figured I could suck it up.
Yeah.
But the funniest thing was I kept losing track of my stupid counts. So I ended up getting this little system of rocks, and every time I ran around the track, I'd look for a rock, pick one up, and put it down, which was wrong for the form, but it's crazy. All right, so we know there's a lot of factors in there, and there's every runner's different. So if we suspect that IT band syndrome's coming on, or we're having some IT pain in the knee, first of all, we'll talk about prevention in a minute, but what are some things we can do immediately, or what are some things that we should start considering to try to get in front of it before it becomes so inflamed that it's causing us problems?
So if you're just getting IT band pain for the first time, then you initially want in the first couple of days to just modify your activity. And, depending upon the level of pain, in general, if your pain doesn't go away in 2 or 3 days, then you probably have something going on. So you should of most injuries, honestly, unless it's that severe high tissue irritability we were talking about before, that you can and you probably should run through some of this pain as long as you're getting some treatment, because then you don't lose your running fitness, and then you're not going from, like you said before, kind of zero, and then you're trying to get back into running, and now you've lost all your running fitness and all your running muscles are weak, and it's harder to get back into it. So it's a matter of just modifying what your current training load is, and backing off speed work, backing off long runs, maybe cutting the mileage back a little bit in the initial phases, and then start to, whether it's if it is truly an inflammatory component, then maybe doing that kind of classic, some NSAIDs in the initial phase, some ice. Definitely do not roll the IT band at the outside part of the knee. I can tell you that. Definitely don't do that, because you're just going to irritate it more. And some people and some runners that I've come into contact with think that that will help loosen it, because it's a matter of it being tight and it's going to help loosen it. Rolling the top part would be excellent. Roll that muscle, roll that TFL muscle in the front part, front outside part of your hip. And then even the IT band, a lot of people roll it, go for the kill on the outside. What I found most helpful for this structure is to actually angle your body slightly forward and actually get the connections of the IT band to your lateral quad, roll that out, and then roll slightly behind the IT band, the connections from the IT band to your lateral hamstring. And then that causes that decompressive effect on the actual band itself. Since I started implementing that strategy, I learned that with an instrument assisted kind of soft tissue course that I went to. And when we do our manual work on it, started utilizing that. And then it's a great self technique for the foam roller to actually do that without adding irritation. So it's almost like unloading or offloading the IT band in those initial stages.
I know that people can't see because we're on video talking, and they can't see that I was holding my thumb up and I had the shaking, because you don't know how many times I see, and I'm not a physical therapist and I don't claim to be, but you know how many times I see people like, oh, I got IT pain and thing. And I know people mean well when they say roll it, but it's so many, like, people will go right over that pain point right where it attaches. And so I'm glad you said that. It was interesting about changing the rolling it to more of the kind of off the side a little bit to
Mm-hmm.
to as well, because that's new information I hadn't heard as well. I knew about rolling maybe farther up the IT band, and that makes total sense. So, anyways, that's cool. That was great. I was smiling when you were talking. Everybody listening didn't see that, so I had to kind of explain why is Steve laughing. All right, so prevention. What do you think is the best thing?
Yes.
Obviously, from uh, any kind of injury. Oh, before we do that, I want to talk a little bit real quick. So you did mention about movement and keeping your training up, and that's something that I've noticed a trend over the last several years as well, is less and less of the rest. That movement really is a form of medicine, and keeps things moving, and keeps the strength up, because now the big thing is, if you stop running, your muscles start to atrophy, you start to get weaker, which then contributes right contributes right to the making the injury potentially worse when you do try to return to running, because now you have a weakened muscle, and not to mention you're out of shape. And I think it's great news now to have runners feel like that they can still train with some different goals and outcomes, but they can still train and feel like they can take a lot of that mental pressure off themselves of, oh, I'm injured, and go into that depressive state. Now you can go back and say, okay, I can still train, and now I have a new goal, one, to get better, but then two, I'm not starting from ground zero when I start. So I love hearing that, because I'm hearing it more and more
Hmm.
from other physical therapists like yourself. And it was great, because this last time I went through physical therapy, they were like, "You do what you want as long as you feel like you can do it." And I'm like, "Yes." Right? It's like,
Yeah,
I don't want to be off, and so I'm glad you brought that up.
absolutely. And looking at, by far the biggest thing in terms of prevention is kind of, spinning off of what you just said, is you need to train in order to run. So your running should not be your training, right? You need to train in order to run healthy. And that really goes for any running related injury, is you have to have that foundational strength. And so looking at preventing it, the biggest thing that I see, and when I analyze the gait and the running form and a lot of the runners I see, is really looking from behind and seeing, is your pelvis level? When you're running, you're standing on one leg the whole time. You're never on two legs. So when you stand on that one leg, your pelvis should be level. If it's not, if it's dropping, then that means you have weakness of the outside hip muscle. So sometimes it's a weakness issue, and sometimes it's really just a motor control issue, and someone didn't know. I didn't know. I just went out and started running, especially novice runners, and they're dropping their hip and they have no clue that they're not supposed to be. So it's more of a retraining and just getting them in tune to that. That when they stand on their leg, they should be activating that side hip muscle and keeping their pelvis level. So they shouldn't be getting a lot of like vertical up and down displacement. So sometimes even just giving simple cues of a lot of runners I work with is like running like you're under a low ceiling, right? And so your foot sitting ground's popping right back up. That usually will improve their cadence a little bit as well, and then allow for that kind of activation of that side hip muscle. But that's the biggest thing, is really strengthening your gluteus medius muscle, that side hip muscle, because that is your primary stabilizer when we're standing on one leg, when we're running. So the stronger that muscle is and the more that you can activate that with your running, then that's going to prevent your iliotibial band from being irritated to begin with. So that's by far the kind of biggest thing, which means that you need to train single leg exercise. So I know you had mentioned like the HIIT workouts, and I do see a lot of, runners, or if they're doing kind of boot camp style class, CrossFit style class, if they're doing a lot of deadlifts, squats, lunges, those are all like two leg exercises. Like you want to make sure that you have some balance, especially for runners. You need to train on one leg in order to get that activation of that side hip muscle. So I would say that's kind of the biggest thing. And the thing that I see that's lacking in a lot of the runners that I work with is single leg training, specific exercises to isolate out leaders. So we're not adding in specific exercises to isolate those out. So every runner should be at least once a week targeting, those muscles to make sure that they're strong enough, they're activated. So then when you're running, you're utilizing those muscles.
Love it. I actually make all my runners that I coach. Well, I can't force it, but I put on their training plan. I have a specific workout 2 times a week for single leg balance drills, single leg strength drills. I even have them do things where they have to stand up on one leg from a seated position. If they can do that about 10 times, that's usually shows pretty good strength. And it's incredible how weak those muscles are when you don't actually do it because even the when I started back, I thought I was doing enough single leg stands because I was just sitting there like doing them when I was in the kitchen, right? And
Hmm.
I would do them whenever it was convenient, or I was sitting there like, getting ready to go to bed, and I was sitting there watching TV for just watching the last minute of sports or something, and I would be doing things like, maybe standing on one leg and then reaching over, trying to create some off balance stuff. And I thought I was doing it enough, and then I went and actually went to one of these hit classes, and our trainer is really, really big on that as well. And so he builds it into kind of during
That's
the
great.
recovery phase of the hit, right? So you get a minute or two of high intensity, and then you got a recovery phase usually of a minute. And that's the kind of stuff they're throwing in, and also maybe doing it on some Bosu balls, some other balance type stuff. But yeah, it's definitely seen a big improvement in the injury prevention, not just with IT band syndrome, but I've also seen it with Achilles and plantar fasciitis and just building all that supporting muscle. I've also seen it with Achilles and plantar fasciitis and just building all that supporting muscle. So love hearing you say that because at least helps validate what I'm doing. So, but yeah, that's very very important. And again, the whole strength training. I love how you said we train to run, and in the past, that hasn't been the case. We ran to train, and we
Hmm.
also didn't emphasize. If you go back and listen to my early episodes of podcast, I talked about it a little bit, but I never emphasized it. In the last couple years, I've completely changed. I will cut back a day of running to add a day of strength training, and I'll do that every week after week. And most of my athletes that I coach, they're strength training twice a week. And so I love you how you said that. So um, I want to wrap up a little bit on IT band syndrome, but I want to make sure what have we not covered when it comes to IT band syndrome? What are we still missing here? We've covered what it is. We've covered prevention. We've covered what to do if you feel like it's coming on. What do we do if we feel like it's just not going away? We've tried all the things ourselves, right? What's our next step?
Yeah, then I if it's not going away and you're just self-treating it yourself, then you definitely need to see a healthcare professional who specializes in working with runners. So they will be able to do a detailed evaluation. Like what I do with my clients is like we kind of talked about. I take video of them running outside, not on a treadmill because the mechanics are different on a treadmill versus on the road. And then we break down frame by frame what's going on with their gait, see how they move. So take them through a movement analysis, see what their squat looks like, see what their single leg squat, see what their pelvis is doing, and then specifically test their muscles, right? So find out, are there muscle imbalances? See which ones are weak, see which ones, have decreased length, and then so you can get a tailored program specific to your specific needs. Because we're talking kind of generalizations and the most common patterns that I'll see in the runners and like what's shown in the literature for this condition, but everyone's different and everybody is different. So you may need a more individualized kind of focused on what you need to specifically do. And then also depending upon, like I said before, the level of irritability, how long it's been going on, the treatment may be different, right? So it's going to be different depending upon what exactly is going on. So I would highly recommend like physical therapist is someone who can evaluate your movement, implement some manual therapy techniques. So whether it's like with my clients, let's say there's trigger points in your lateral hip muscles. So in the outside hip muscles, whether or not that's, not allowing them to fire as they should, I do some trigger point dry needling, or we can do some instrument assisted Graston work to those muscles. Or maybe there's a hip mobility issue and we need to mobilize your hip joint. So a physical therapist can do those things as well as provide you the specific customized exercises that you need to get this problem better on your own and kind of give you that tailored program. So I would definitely recommend there are simple solutions to this problem. In other words, there is no there's really no other level of medical care for IT band syndrome, meaning, if you have let's say a rotator cuff tear, or you have something more significant, let's just say a disc, issue with your back pain is pushing on a nerve root, you may next level of care where you might need an injection, right? So where they have to inject to calm down the inflammation, or God forbid, the worst, case scenario is surgery, right? So like for my hip, for my labral tear, I eventually needed surgery. I tried all the conservative measures. But for IT band syndrome, there is no surgery. There is no injection that you're going to get in your knee. So it will get better. You just need to find out what's causing your IT band syndrome to begin with, and then get going on that plan in order for it to get better. So don't let it go on for a long period of time, because there are simple solutions that you can implement. And it's really a combination of, yes, the physical factors that are going on, whether it's muscle weakness issues, muscle length issues, but also training. So modifying that training program. And then we talked about the environment of the roads or the track, but then maybe even footwear as well. So shoes. Do you need to replace your running sneakers? And are you rolling in a lot? Are you getting excessive wear on the outside? So all of those factors will go into play. And that's why it is good to see, whatever medical care professional you see, usually it helps to see someone who specializes in working with runners, because they will not only look at the kind of physical part of their, profession, but also look at the other factors that are specific to runners.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Before we go, I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about where people can find you. If people are interested in more of running injuries and some of the things that you offer around that, what are the best ways to get a hold of you? And yeah, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so there's definitely a couple of platforms, and I have a bunch of kind of free content and resources. A couple of platforms, and I have a bunch of kind of free content and resources specific for runners. I guess the main hub you can go to is sparkyourtraining.com. And that's the website, which will kind of direct you into any areas you need to go specifically. But I also do have a Facebook group called the Healthy Runner CT Facebook group, where it's just a community of like-minded runners looking for kind of healthy strategies, whether it's from a physical standpoint, exercise, injury prevention. We have a bunch of nutritionists in the group, or if we're just looking for kind of local races and all the trials and tribulations and struggles we go through as runners. So the Healthy Runner CT group, there's a lot of free content we do in there. We go live every week. And then on Instagram, I do have a hashtag specifically for runners, the hashtag SparkRunner, and the Instagram handle is @SparkYourTraining. And then on YouTube, I actually have a playlist specific for runners, and the YouTube channel is Spark Your Training. And there's actually, as of right now, there's 67 videos specific for runners, just looking at healthy tips. So those are like live videos that I've done, live trainings, as well as specific exercises. So like the IT band rolling, for instance, like that was a custom one we talked about. That's on the YouTube channel. I have a playlist of just foam rolling exercises. You'll see 10 foam rolling exercises. Go check out the IT band one, so you can stop like mashing away at the most painful part of your IT band and kind of release that a little bit better, as well as finding specific muscle activation exercises for that gluteus medius muscle. So you can find them all on the
Instagram channel is amazing, and the videos, the quality of the videos are amazing. So I'm jealous, because it's like I suck at video, and I really haven't figured out Instagram. And so when I started following you, and I think we connected on Instagram originally, and when I started following you, I was like, man, it's like I wish I could make mine look like that, you know. It's just like they're really good, because like you're so natural on video. And so for everybody who's listening, go check out the YouTube channel. Definitely subscribe. Great videos. Check out the website. There's an article right there that I had up in front of me this whole time, and it talks about IT band, and it's got the video embedded right in there. And definitely follow him on Instagram. It's a great channel. The videos are entertaining. They're lively. They're not just me sitting here talking like real boring, right? They're phenomenal. So I wish I could do video. I'm gonna study them a little bit more and figure out how to make mine look more like yours. Different topic, but you know, I'm not going to talk about what you're talking about, but it's just like you got great graphics and stuff. So well done. That's impressive.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's been hard work, and I'm just trying to put out the best content to kind of help other runners out there. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Great content, because I've used the videos as a resource just to learn more for my own self-studying. So you know, like YouTube's like a rabbit hole, right? You go to one video, and next thing you know, it's 4 hours gone by, and there's like, you've been through 50 videos. But for PT videos, man, and the stuff you're covering on them, they're definitely good. All right, hey, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. This was so much fun, and I learned a lot. And I'm sure people, this is such a common runner. Learned a lot. And I'm sure people, this is such a common runner. Such a common running problem. I get this all the time. So I don't know why it took me 5 years to get to this topic. We just kind of talk very generically about them, but when it comes to something like this, it's like I want to hear it from the people who actually treat it versus me kind of winging it and making it up. But yeah, this has been great, and I just want to thank you for coming on the show, and appreciate it, definitely.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I've been a long time listener to your podcast, and I think you're doing great things. I love listening to your podcast on my long runs, so I appreciate the opportunity. This has been really fun, and I hope some of the runners out there find out, get some helpful tips.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate you coming on, and I'm sure we'll be chatting soon.
All right, Steve.
All right,
have a good one.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.